So we're continuing our lecture series for BA 310. Again, my name is Michael Scharf, and I am likely not your professor for your section of the class. So if you have any questions about the content of this class, please contact your instructor for your class. In this video, we're going to start and go over chapter 4, which is about capitalism. And I guess the first question is, what is capitalism? And what does it mean? And really it comes down to capitalism means that the means of production in that society are in private hands. Now that terminology can be a little bit confusing on what it means to have production in private hands. And what that term means is that people own the means of production. Or in many cases companies, but companies are owned by people. And to look at the opposite of that would be that the means of production are in public hands. And again, I think those terms can get a little bit confusing because we might think of the public as people. But I think an easy way to think about this is the public school system. And the public school system is really the government school system. That the government determines the courses that people will take and what those courses are included, and all the teachers in a public school system are government, usually state, but government employees. Whereas a private school is owned by somebody, and the employees of that private school are employees of that company. So I think that's an easier way to think about the difference between public and private so that it's less confusing on what those terms mean. But really the capitalist society just means that the means of production are in private hands. And the text highlights 4 key features of a capitalist society. And the first one is the existence of companies. And again, that makes sense, but really it means that companies exist outside of the people that work in them. That, pick a company, whether it's Tesla, Apple, whatever. Now with Tesla, we might say, well, Tesla is Elon Musk, but really that the existence of companies, that companies are this artificial and invisible thing out there that exists outside of the people that own them. And we'll talk more about this whole idea of limited liability and things like that in chapter 5. The second item is that companies in a capitalist society operate under the profit motive. And as Milton Friedman said, that really companies have no other obligation but to seek a profit and follow the law. And the next one is free and open competition. That in a capitalist society, in a pure capitalist society, there are no barriers to competition. That if you see a need for whatever it is, that you can start a company and there are no barriers. Now, I will say, as a caveat to all this, that while we say the United States is a capitalist society, there are barriers to entering into a business. And therefore, we don't live in a pure capitalist society because there are barriers. That the government says that you have to have a business license, and the government can deny you a business license. If you want to open up a bar, not only do you need that business license, but you also need an alcohol license to sell alcohol. Again, the government can deny that. So while we say that we live in a capitalist society in the United States, it's not a pure capitalist society, because if it was, you would be able to open that. And then the last one is this idea of private property, that people own the means of production. And as a kind of a moral justification for a capitalist society, we'll go back to chapter 2 and talk about Adam Smith's invisible hand theory, where he said that there is this invisible hand that drives people to do the right thing. And if everyone in society is seeking profit, in the long term, that you're seeking profit, that the good of society will be served. That I won't do something that is not in my long-term benefit because I will suffer harm for that. So I will not cheat you in business because it's really not in my long-term benefit. And I think in chapter 2, we discussed a little bit about why that might not work in today's society. And there are some criticisms of capitalism. That one of the criticisms is that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. I don't know that the second half of that is really true. I think there is evidence of the gap grows between those that have and those that don't have. But I also think that the poor don't get poorer because in the United States, in one of the more capitalist societies, the poor are much better off than in any other society out there. So while we may agree that the gap between those grows, which is evidenced in our society, I don't know that the poor get poorer in a capitalist society. The second criticism is that the markets are not rational and they don't always act in a rational manner. And one economist, John Maynard Keynes, said that, which is interesting, that markets have the ability to remain irrational longer than you have the ability to stay solvent. Another one comes from Karl Marx, and he said that it is only through exploitation that capitalists make a profit, and that work really isn't voluntary but imposed forced labor. And again, if we think about that, perhaps in a pure capitalist society, that statement might have some truth to it. That you and I really just can't not work at all in a pure capitalist society, because in a pure capitalist society, there is no fallback position and there's no welfare and things like that, that you either work or you don't eat. And if you don't eat, pretty soon, in a short amount of time, you will die. But again, I don't know that, especially in the United States society, that his statement is necessarily true. So the opposite of capitalism is this idea of socialism, which of course Karl Marx was for. And socialism just means that the means of production are in public hands. And again, we emphasize the difference between public and private, that when we say that the means of production is in private hands or public hands, we really mean that the government owns the means of production. And there's a whole lot of issues with that, that if you don't gain from increasing profit, how hard will you work to increase profit? If you don't gain from studying harder, how hard will you study? If we just say everybody's getting a C, are you going to actually study the material? Or if we say everyone gets the average grade in the class, how hard are you really going to study? And that goes for both the extremely bright student and maybe the student that's struggling. How hard will they go? Some criticisms of socialism. Winston Churchill, to give you some ideas, Winston Churchill said, socialism is the philosophy of failure, the creed of ignorance, and the gospel of envy. In other words, we really focus on those rich people, and all the world's problems are because of those rich people. Another criticism, Thomas Jefferson said that a government big enough to supply you with everything that you need is a government big enough to take away everything that you have. So these are just some quick review of the difference between capitalism and socialism. You have a test this week, and the test really focuses on all the chapters that we've done so far. What I would recommend is review the slides. You can watch these videos once more. But one of the things that I always recommend students do is either to take capitalism, socialism, it doesn't matter, or one of the cases that you've done thus far and apply all the different ethical theories to that case. What would you do in, again, it doesn't matter whether it's capitalism or socialism, would it be ethical, would capitalism be ethical under relativism, under egoism, under utilitarianism? Or you could take one of the cases that you've done thus far, is eminent domain ethical under, and then go through each one of the ethical theories to make sure that you understand what each ethical theory is and you can apply it, and also what the argument against each one of the ethical theories is. So good luck on the test, everybody, and our next video is going to be on chapter 5, which is more on companies.